Crockett drops bombshell email from Mike Pompeo. His face says it all. Nobody in the House Oversight Committee hearing room could have foreseen the storm that was about to hit. It started the way these things always do. A panel of politicians, a witness with a carefully polished smile, and the low murmur of reporters waiting for a headline. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo sat poised at the witness table, his confidence radiating as the cameras honed in on his signature smirk. He had just brushed off yet another probing question, the latest in a string of what he considered pointless partisan attacks. To him, this was just another day, a routine display of political theater, a chance to prove once again that no one could lay a glove on him. But the mood shifted the moment Representative Jasminecrockett rose from her chair. She held up what looked like an ordinary piece of printed paper, a detail easy to miss, yet loaded with the promise of chaos. There was a deliberate calm in her demeanor, a silent assurance that something extraordinary was about to unfold. As she stood, a hush swept through the chamber. Even seasoned committee staffers paused mid-note, their pens stilled by the brewing sense of anticipation. "Mr. Pompeo," she began, her voice clear, carrying across the room with the authority of someone who was not there to perform. "Before we move forward, I believe the American people deserve to hear something you wrote yourself." Her gaze didn't waver. In that instant, the usual script was tossed aside. Pompeo's eyes narrowed, sensing, perhaps for the first time, that the rules of engagement had suddenly changed. The smirk that had carried him through countless interviews and hearings remained, but a flicker of unease settled just behind it. Every camera in the room zoomed in, hungry for the instant his composure would crack. Journalists exchanged silent glances, primed for the kind of historic moment that would define headlines for weeks. The room seemed to shrink, air thick with the electricity of what everyone sensed was coming. This wasn't just another round of political sparring, it was turning personal, real, a high-stakes duel with reputations on the line. Crockett, still holding that unremarkable printout, didn't rush. She let the silence build, gave the tension time to suffocate the space. Only then did she start to read, the words of an email Pompeo had written, never imagining it would surface in the harsh glare of public scrutiny. With each sentence, the veneer of confidence Pompeo wore so easily began to peel away. His trademark bravado wavered, his posture stiffened. In mere moments, the power dynamic had flipped. The audience, committee members, staffers, millions watching online, knew they were witnessing the kind of unscripted spectacle that could ruin a legacy. Every word was a hammer blow. The smug certainty on Pompeo's face faded, replaced by the calculation of a man scrambling to regain control. The gravity of the moment was felt by everyone in the chamber, Democrat and Republican alike. By the time Crockett finished reading, it was obvious. This wasn't just about Pompeo or politics. This was the rare event when the truth had crashed through the facade and history happened live, right in front of their eyes. And yet, as the shockwave rippled through the room, one question hung heavy in the air. If this was how the hearing started, just how far would Representative Crockett go to reveal what no one else had dared to bring to light? Power, legacy, and the relentless battle for public trust, these were the invisible forces swirling beneath the surface as the House Oversight Committee's hearing threatened to explode. This wasn't simply a clash of political rivals, it was a collision of ambition and accountability, old guard calculation, and new blood resolve. At the center stood two figures, each carrying the hopes and fears of millions, their futures now intertwined in a moment that had the potential to upend everything. Mike Pompeo had spent the better part of his adult life climbing the steep rungs of American power: West Point, Congress, CIA director, and finally Secretary of State. His career was studded with evidence of strategic brilliance and political resilience. He wore experience like armor, certain that the bruises of past fights had made him untouchable. For Pompeo, this hearing was meant to be routine, one more arena to outmaneuver critics and burnish his credentials for a 2028 presidential campaign. His handlers had rehearsed every scenario, drilled him on every possible attack, and smoothed every word that might slip out of place. The stakes were monumental: maintain his image as the unflappable statesman, or risk exposing the vulnerabilities he'd spent a lifetime concealing. But a different kind of energy fueled Representative Jasminecrockett. As one of just a handful of black women on the committee, she didn't simply represent her district, she embodied a promise of justice for millions who felt unseen and unheard by a distant government. Crockett was a trial lawyer by trade, a fighter by instinct, and a disruptor by necessity. Since stepping onto the national stage, she'd refused to play by the unspoken rules, unafraid to target the powerful or challenge norms that protected the status quo. Her presence at this hearing wasn't about scoring partisan points. It was about accountability, about proving that no official, no matter how connected, was above the law. For Crockett, the risks were personal and political. Every question, every line of inquiry would be dissected by allies and adversaries alike. A misstep could brand her as reckless or unqualified. A triumph could catapult her into the upper echelons of political influence. More than her own reputation was at stake. Her performance would shape perceptions of who could wield power in Congress and on whose behalf. The tension between these two, Pompeo's practiced composure versus Crockett's unyielding resolve, created a spectacle charged with the urgency of a political thriller. The stakes reached beyond personal ambition. The committee's investigation grappled with real questions. Had Pompeo abused his office for private gain? Did secret deals compromise national interests? Were there patterns of corruption echoing through the corridors of power that demanded exposure? As the hearing unfolded, the room's attention oscillated between Pompeo, the master of political deflection, and Crockett, the relentless prosecutor hunting the truth. The gallery filled with anticipation, aware that reputations, careers, and perhaps the future shape of American politics hung in the balance. Yet the outcome was far from certain. Could Pompeo's decades of cunning shield him from this barrage? Would Crockett's methodical approach break through the fortress of denials? As they faced off, every answer became more than a statement of fact. It was a test of character and will, a measure of who would define the limits of accountability in American democracy. The stakes for Pompeo, his credibility, his presidential hopes, his public legacy. For Crockett, her standing as a new force in Congress, her commitment to exposing corruption, her role as a voice for those denied justice. The drama bristled with the tension of two distinct paths, one looking to preserve power, the other determined to challenge it. And with every word exchanged, the nation watched, waiting to see whether experience or audacious truth-seeking would carry the day. The next move and its consequences would reverberate far beyond the hearing room. The air in the hearing room felt thick, charged with the kind of anticipation that precedes a collision. On one side of the table sat Mike Pompeo, a man forged in the crucible of war rooms and back channels, a figure so accustomed to wielding power that anything less than dominance felt unthinkable. Years of service across the globe had taught him to expect every maneuver, to anticipate every attack. Diplomacy was, for Pompeo, a contact sport played by his rules. His responses to questions, even tough ones, were polished to a sheen, honed by hundreds of hours facing critics and allies alike. He was the unstoppable force, never off balance, never exposed, until today. Pompeo's confidence was legendary. He had survived scandal, scrutiny, even the ferocious spotlight of the Trump administration, emerging each time a little more certain in his invulnerability. Watching him, one could almost believe that no scandal could stick, no accusation could land. He radiated the kind of assurance that made staffers breathe easier, and opponents grind their teeth in frustration. This was a man who had learned not just to weather storms, but to engineer them, turning every accusation into ammunition, every investigation into proof of his own importance. Smirks, shrugs, and razor-edged wit, these comprised the shield and sword he wielded against any threat. Yet directly across from him sat jasminecrockett, the immovable object, unbowed, unafraid, and crucially, unpredictable. If Pompeo was the veteran, Crockett was the insurgent. Her lack of deference to rank, long resumes, or insider customs made her uniquely dangerous to establishment figures who thrived on routine. She didn't meet force with more force. She sidestepped, redirected, and outmaneuvered. Her legal background lent her an almost chess-like patience, constructing her arguments move by calculated move, laying subtle traps that often went unnoticed until it was far too late. Even as the committee buzzed with the spectacle of Pompeo's bravado, Crockett never once balked. For her, intimidation wasn't an obstacle, but a marker that she was headed in the right direction. Unlike many before her, she wasn't interested in scoring points or momentary headlines. Her targets were much larger: truth, transparency, justice. She knew that old power rarely yielded unless forced, and that the rules of the game could and should change. What made this face-off so electric wasn't noise, but the silence between volleys. Pompeo deflected with practiced lines, assuming Crockett would tire, lose her precision, or reveal her inexperience. But Crockett didn't. She listened. She waited. She pressed, looking for micro-expressions and half-answers, collecting each verbal dodge as evidence for the next, deeper strike. Pompeo expected a battle of wits. Instead, he found a contest of resolve. Observers felt the chess match intensify. Remarks that would have rattled other questioners drew only the faintest smile from Crockett. She didn't need to prove her intelligence. She simply let evidence accumulate, each fact layered on the last like bricks in a wall. Pompeo, feeling the pressure, grew sharper, more dismissive, a dangerous sign for a man used to scripting every outcome. As the two faced off, the old order, reliant on intimidation and performance, met the new, built on method and relentless accountability. The unstoppable force battered against the immovable object. Each time the force tried to knock the object off course, it merely revealed another, subtler layer beneath. A resilience that couldn't be bullied, a purpose that couldn't be shaken. And as each minute passed, it became clearer. For maybe the first time in his career, Pompeo's momentum met real resistance. Crockett didn't just resist, she absorbed his power, terrors. Ning it back on him. The spectacle was no longer about who knew the rules, but who could rewrite them in real time. Still, the most explosive revelation was yet to come. The unstoppable force had struck the immovable object, and now everyone was watching to see which would yield, or if the collision would shatter the whole foundation beneath them. While the world watched the political giants clash on the public stage, few understood the invisible risk pulsing just beneath it. A risk quietly woven by someone far from the spotlight. The fate of this hearing, and perhaps even Pompeo's once unshakable legacy, hinged on a figure no one in the committee room would ever see: the whistleblower. Hidden behind layers of encryption and anonymity, this insider possessed something infinitely more powerful than public rhetoric: evidence. For years, the State Department's vast digital archives had been their domain. With a career spanning over a decade in IT security, they'd watched cabinet officials and political operatives glide through doors off limits to most, sometimes pushing rules to their breaking point. But it wasn't until Pompeo's post-government dealings grabbed national attention that discomfort morphed into outrage. Early on, the whistleblower had rationalized the quiet compromises: memos deleted, access logs quietly tweaked, emails redirected to private accounts. It was the stuff of bureaucratic survival. But as new stories of backroom deals and ethical shortcuts surfaced, the atmosphere soured. Loyalty to the institution and to the idea that public service demanded integrity finally outweighed loyalty to power. The decision to come forward was anything but impulsive. Every click, every stored screenshot, every extracted backup was a line crossed with full knowledge of the consequences. The whistleblower agonized over the risks: loss of career, criminal prosecution, the collapse of a carefully guarded anonymity. They considered the examples set by others, stories of whistleblowers sell. Braided by one side, vilified by the other, their lives upended either way. Was any truth worth that? But there's a strange kind of clarity that comes when one finally decides to act. Using secure channels, the whistleblower reached out to Jasminecrockett's office. They had followed Crockett's rise closely, seeing in her the fire of someone who might actually protect their identity and, more importantly, do something with the evidence. The encrypted messages laid out a tantalizing offer: unreleased emails, timelines, even internal Treasury communications that had never been scrubbed or redacted. For Crockett, it was the missing puzzle piece, proof that could flip the entire narrative. The real-world risk was haunting. The whistleblower's hands shook as they synced copies of Pompeo's communications to secure drives, checked timestamps, and made sure no detail could point squarely to them. Debates raged nightly in their own mind. Should they remain silent, or trust this rising representative with files that could end a career, or at worst, set off a national scandal? Ultimately, what tipped the scales wasn't ambition or the promise of reward. It was frustration, seeing colleagues punished for asking too many questions, watching truth buried under layers of process and plausible deniability, realizing that without evidence there would be nothing to stop the next abuse of power. It was a sense of duty to the truth, to the system itself, an act of faith that evidence, placed in the right hands, could still matter. By the time Crockett opened the email on her encrypted laptop, the whistleblower's sacrifice was done. History would not remember their name, but as the contents loaded, irrefutable, time-stamped, damning, the balance of power began to tilt. So while committee rooms thundered and cameras flashed, fate turned quietly, invisibly. The back door had been opened, truth liberated at enormous risk, and for the first time in months, the machinery of accountability was grinding to life. The world would soon see the result, but few would ever know the price paid by the one person who made it all possible. The clash began with a choreography so familiar it was almost ritual. Pompeo rolling out his polished talking points, the Republican committee members offering knowing smirks, and the Democratic side bracing for a wall of deflection. Pompeo, a veteran of countless political battles, handled questions like a boxer slipping punches. Every attack was sidestepped, every uncomfortable fact reframed. If a question hinted at scandal, Pompeo responded with a measured rebuttal or, when the setting allowed, a subtly condescending quip, one designed to disarm critics and signal to allies that he remained unfazed. Representative Crockett, however, refused to play her part in the old political theater. She entered the fray with measured calm, not the bombast or sound bites that might have handed Pompeo an opening to pivot. Instead of grandstanding or raising her voice, she started with specific, meticulously sourced questions, ones that cut through generalities and forced Pompeo to either answer plainly or reveal his discomfort. It was clear from the first exchange that this was not a routine cross-examination. Crockett's rhythm was different. Rather than leading with a broad accusation, she drilled down the name of Pompeo's new political action committee, the timeline of its creation, its mysterious financial windfall. Pompeo reached for his familiar defenses. He wrapped himself in the language of legality and precedent. "That's a perfectly legal pact, Congresswoman," projecting both confidence and irritation. But behind the casual assurance, a new edge appeared in his voice as Crockett interrupted the pattern with records and details. She cited Department of Justice filings, named companies, and summoned the specter of foreign connections to American defense firms. As each answer grew less specific and more defensive, the committee and the cameras sensed a subtle shift. The audience witnessed a masterclass in political jujitsu. With every attempt at deflection, claims of routine paperwork, lawyer-client privilege, or accusations of partisan fishing, Crockett countered, not with aggression, but with evidence. She dismantled vague answers by quoting from filings, emails, and government reports, boxing Pompeo in and removing escape routes one by one. His confidence began to slip as it became obvious she wasn't building to a single point, but establishing a web, a narrative of influence, timing, and personal benefit. Each question left Pompeo with a choice: admit to knowledge he denied, or pretend ignorance at the risk of looking evasive. The effect was cumulative. While Pompeo still played to his base with measured barbs, it was clear even the usual tactics, invoking attorney-client privilege, accusing Democrats of overreach, denouncing the hearing as political theater, were falling flat under the weight of specificity. The exchanges grew tenser, the committee room's atmosphere electric with anticipation. Instead of the typical crescendo where politicians repeat talking points louder and louder, the drama inched forward with every clipped reply, every paper Crockett referenced and entered into the record. The veteran's playbook of dodging and dismissing suddenly looked outdated against the methodical, evidence-driven prosecution from the committee's newest force. But Crockett wasn't done. Each section ended with a careful, almost surgical transition, not a retreat, but a foreshadowing of the evidence yet to come. "That's quite a sum for consulting, Mr. Pompeo, but what about your timeline with the Treasury?" The questions advanced, setting traps that Pompeo's instincts could not evade. Each movement baited him into a position where the next surprise and the next damning document waited. By the time the cross-examination reached its peak, the balance of power in the hearing was unmistakably shifting. Pompeo's famous confidence was tinged with anxiety, his jiu-jitsu meeting its match in Crockett's relentless precision. The old ways of surviving committee hearings had collided head-on with a new, rigorous, and relentless approach. And as the sequence of reveals drew to a close, the room exhaled, gripped by a rising realization. For the first time in years, the game had changed, and it looked like, this time, clarity might succeed where spin had always prevailed before. As the tension crackled in the hearing room, Crockett's measured approach gave way to something even more formidable, the undeniable weight of hard evidence. Gone were the days of speculation and speculation, replaced now by the electric anticipation of revelation. She held the email aloft, its plain appearance masking the explosive impact it was about to deliver. All eyes fell on Pompeo. The usual air of political performance evaporated, replaced by anxious silence, as if everyone awaited a thunderclap. Crockett began to read, her voice slicing through the quiet, each syllable amplifying the gravity that settled over the committee. Steve, need this situation resolved. The Treasury is dragging their feet on lifting the sanction. We both know this guy is clean, and there are American jobs on the line. Can you expedite the review? I owe you one, Mike. The words, simple, yet damning, reverberated across the chamber. For once, Pompeo's legendary composure betrayed him. A flicker of uncertainty, a tightened jaw, the subtle signs of a man who realized he'd lost control. The committee, viewers, staffers, even seasoned politicians, leaned in, many unknowingly holding their breath. Crockett never broke eye contact. She let the silence stretch, letting each word's implications seep in. But the first email was only the beginning. She reached for a second printout, the tension nearly intolerable. Bill, Kovic's deal should be moving forward soon. Mino is handling the Treasury review personally, should be cleared by the end of month, which means we can announce the consulting contract in February. Make sure the pack paperwork is ready to go. This is going to be a very profitable year. Mike? This time, a visible pulse of panic ran through the Republican side of the room. Pompeo's allies, who had chuckled and whispered just moments before, now avoided his gaze. Pompeo tried to rally. Those emails are out of context, fabricated, he barked, desperation tinging his words. But Crockett continued with cold precision. Mr. Pompeo, these emails were provided to the committee by a whistleblower within the State Department's IT security division. They've been verified by the FBI's forensics unit. Metadata confirms they were sent from your devices at the described dates and times. One by one, Crockett introduced supporting documents, phone logs matching late-night calls between Pompeo and Treasury officials, records of meetings and rapid-fire financial transactions between the companies at the center of the storm. Each piece was a nail in the coffin, constructing a timeline that linked Pompeo's requests to sanction relief, his personal enrichment, and the lucrative contracts that followed for his political organization. Chaos simmered beneath the surface. Confident Republican defenders shifted in their seats uncomfortably while Democrats grew bolder, their disbelief turning to incredulous vindication. Even members of the press began furiously texting their editors. Bombshell. Pompeo emails confirmed. Direct line between sanctions business. With every revelation, Crockett's questions became sharper and more direct, while Pompeo's responses grew halting, tangled in denial and defensive outbursts. I served this country for decades. This is a witch hunt, he shouted at one point, voice raw, but the evidence was ironclad, the audience unmovable. Behind Crockett, a pile of documents rested as a symbol of how thoroughly she had anticipated her adversary's defenses. This isn't about routine business, Mr. Pompeo, she finished, her voice level. This is about using public office for private gain, the very thing our committee exists to prevent. Suddenly, the drama eclipsed policy arguments and partisan spectacle. It became the story of a system exposed, a giant toppled by the truth he never expected would surface. The spell of invincibility was shattered, and as Pompeo searched desperately for a foothold, everyone in the room understood they had just witnessed the turning of a tide, one email, one fact at a time. The air in the committee room felt as if it had turned to glass, everyone witnessing, nobody daring to move, the tension poised to shatter with Pompeo at its center. The armor of slick retorts and habitual bravado he had worn for decades was faltering piece by piece. The figure once renowned for his strategic cunning, the one who'd sailed through storms of controversy, now looked cornered in a way few could have imagined. Every breath, every side glance to his legal team betrayed a man running calculations in real time, fight, retreat, or simply survive the hour. His responses, "Sisam, oh sharp just moments ago," grew ragged and defensive. "This is a witch hunt," Pompeo insisted, his voice rising, a quiver barely disguised by forced indignation. Each denial seemed to echo in the heavy silence, met not with the usual nods from his loyal base, but with downward gazes and shifting seats. The Republicans, who had only minutes before rallied around allusions to partisan attacks, now distanced themselves, quietly exchanging looks that bespoke disbelief and a desire not to be implicated by association. Pompeo's hands trembled as he reached for his water, the shake so slight that only the most practiced observer would catch it. The hidden tells of someone once unflappable breaking apart under siege. His lawyer slipped him a note urging silence, reminding him that invoking the fifth might be his only path out. But the script Pompeo had always controlled was now ripped away, replaced by the relentless ledger of facts and timelines Crockett had brought to light. He tried new angles, playing the patriot, invoking decades of public service, appealing to emotion. But the words landed with the weightlessness of routine, overshadowed by the mounting evidence now vivid in everyone's mind. Instead of questions about details and intent, the exchange became a one-sided reckoning. Crockett calmly cited phone logs, financial records, official correspondences, each revelation closing another escape route. "I put my life on the line for this country, and you want to drag my name through the mud for paperwork?" Pompeo's tone shifted between fury and pleading, no longer commanding so much as grasping. His voice, once clear and booming, warbled as he realized no counterattack could reassemble the pieces. Every deflection, routine business, misinterpreted emails, context lost, crumbled under the next precise presentation of documentation. The audience watched, transfixed, as Pompeo's composure gave way to visible panic. His signature smirk was gone, replaced by a grim set to the jaw and redness that crept up his neck. Attempts to interject and stonewall turned into open desperation. "You're twisting my words. I demand to see the originals. This is political theater." But Crockett's momentum was impossible to blunt. Every interruption only gave more oxygen to the spectacle. Camera shutters clicked. Journalists' hands raced across keyboards, the world already digesting sound bites destined for viral immortality. Finally, faced with the unassailable wall of verified proof and with no supporters left to absorb the blows, Pompeo's fight became pure instinct, a last-ditch attempt at performance. But there was no script left, no audience sympathetic enough to lift him out. Every explanation now felt hollow. The moment belonged to accountability, and the old power of evasion had failed. In those few minutes of unraveling, a career that had thrived on strength and unbreakable discipline finally, irreversibly, collapsed. And as the hearing room erupted, in chaos, in outrage, in the furious realization that history had just shifted, the former Secretary of State stood isolated, undone not by enemies but by the truths he thought would forever remain hidden. The air in the committee room felt as if it had turned to glass. Everyone witnessing, nobody daring to move, the tension poised to shatter with Pompeo at its center. The armor of slick retorts and habitual bravado he had worn for decades was faltering piece by piece. The figure once renowned for his strategic cunning, the one who'd sailed through storms of controversy, now looked cornered in a way few could have imagined. Every breath, every side glance to his legal team betrayed a man running calculations in real time: fight, retreat, or simply survive the hour. His responses, so sharp just moments ago, grew ragged and defensive. "This is a witch hunt," Pompeo insisted, his voice rising, a quiver barely disguised by forced indignation. Each denial seemed to echo in the heavy silence, met not with the usual nods from his loyal base, but with downward gazes and shifting seats. The Republicans, who had only minutes before rallied around allusions to partisan attacks, now distanced themselves, quietly exchanging looks that bespoke disbelief and a desire not to be implicated by association. Pompeo's hands trembled as he reached for his water, the shake so slight that only the most practiced observer would catch it, the hidden tells of someone once unflappable breaking apart under siege. His lawyer slipped him a note urging silence, reminding him that invoking the fifth might be his only path out. But the script Pompeo had always controlled was now ripped away, replaced by the relentless ledger of facts and timelines Crockett had brought to light. He tried new angles, playing the patriot, invoking decades of public service, appealing to emotion, but the words landed with the weightlessness of routine, overshadowed by the mounting evidence now vivid in everyone's mind. Instead of questions about details and intent, the exchange became a one-sided reckoning. Crockett calmly cited phone logs, financial records, official correspondences, each revelation closing another escape route. I put my life on the line for this country, and you want to drag my name through the mud for paperwork? Pompeo's tone shifted between fury and pleading, no longer commanding so much as grasping. His voice, once clear and booming, warbled as he realized no counterattack could reassemble the pieces. Every deflection, routine business, misinterpreted emails, context lost, crumbled under the next precise presentation of documentation. The audience watched, transfixed, as Pompeo's composure gave way to visible panic. His signature smirk was gone, replaced by a grim set to the jaw and redness that crept up his neck. Attempts to interject and stonewall turned into open desperation. "You're twisting my words. I demand to see the originals. This is political theater." But Crockett's momentum was impossible to blunt. Every interruption only gave more oxygen to the spectacle. Camera shutters clicked. Journalists' hands raced across keyboards, the world already digesting sound bites destined for viral immortality. Finally, faced with the unassailable wall of verified proof and with no supporters left to absorb the blows, Pompeo's fight became pure instinct, a last-ditch attempt at performance. But there was no script left, no audience sympathetic enough to lift him out. Every explanation now felt hollow. The moment belonged to accountability, and the old power of evasion had failed. In those few minutes of unraveling, a career that had thrived on strength and unbreakable discipline finally, irreversibly, collapsed. And as the hearing room erupted, in chaos, in outrage, in the furious realization that history had just shifted, the former Secretary of State stood isolated, undone not by enemies, but by the truths he thought would forever remain hidden. In the days and weeks following the hearing, the aftershocks of Pompeo's unraveling didn't merely echo, they reshaped the very landscape of American politics. The viral moment didn't fade with the news cycle. Instead, it seeded a storm of scrutiny, turning the corridors of Congress and the campaign trail into ground zero for a reckoning with power and accountability. For Mike Pompeo, the damage was instantaneous and severe. His meticulously nurtured path toward a 2028 presidential run was all but demolished. The night of the hearing, the usual circuit of interviews and public appearances became a gauntlet. Conservative anchors, once reliable supporters, pressed him for explanations regarding the emails and financial trails. Newsrooms dissected his every word, replaying the footage of his disintegration with slow-motion precision. The refrain was inescapable. His credibility was crippled, his ambitions diffused by the weight of evidence broadcast globally. Once a mainstay of Republican unity, Pompeo's allies began a quick exodus, with donors withdrawing support and longtime backers offering only clipped statements about the importance of verifying all facts. The consequences extended far beyond Pompeo alone. Republican strategists scrambled to control the fallout, reassessing the party's approach to post-Trump-era power brokers. The House Oversight Committee, galvanized by Crockett's performance, announced a broader investigation into conflict of interest allegations among current and former high-ranking officials. Even those untouched by scandal felt the chill. Suddenly, private dealings and confidences were reconsidered in the cold light of possible exposure. The lesson was unmistakable. Old norms of plausible deniability and political impunity no longer offered real protection. Meanwhile, Jasminecrockett's star ascended with a velocity rare in Washington. Overnight, she became the subject of widespread interviews, her questioning style held up as a new benchmark for congressional accountability. Op-eds lauded her preparation, composure, and refusal to be cowed. Some called for her to lead future high-profile investigations, while others saw her as a symbol of a new generation unwilling to accept the business-as-usual ethos of the establishment. Constituents and young activists flooded her office with messages of support, urging her to continue pressing for transparency, her trial lawyer's precision now redefined as the gold standard for political inquiry. As the political landscape shifted, the reverberations spread across federal agencies and the national media. The Department of Justice announced a formal review of the committee's evidence, sending the unmistakable signal that even the highest offices would not be immune from legal accountability. Civil servants and whistleblowers began to step forward with their own stories. In newsrooms and think tanks, a broader conversation took hold. How had the system enabled such self-dealing? What mechanisms had failed, and who else might one day face a similar reckoning? But perhaps most striking was the shift in public consciousness. The hearing exposed, in real time, the mechanics of power, how it is built, preserved, and sometimes shattered. Viewers, particularly younger Americans cynical about government, now saw proof that determined questioning and careful documentation could unravel even the most fortified reputations. Social feeds and town hall meetings buzzed with debate about accountability, self-dealing, and the real costs of political immunity. The aftermath left some careers in ruins, others on the rise, and a city on edge about what might happen next. Old alliances morphed or dissolved, whispers of reform swirled in committee rooms. The reputation of Capitol Hill as a stage for empty theater was, if not erased, then at least complicated by what millions witnessed. A moment when evidence trumped evasion, and the truth, once revealed, changed everything it touched. The shockwaves from the hearing didn't simply end with the sound of a gavel. In the weeks that followed, Washington reeled from this collision of truth and power, left questioning what exactly comes next when the careful veil over the corridors of authority is torn down in public view. The country, its leaders, and its citizens now found themselves staring at the raw machinery beneath, exposed, vulnerable, and demanding a reckoning. For Mike Pompeo, the path forward had turned from one of ambition to one of survival. As investigations gathered momentum, the Department of Justice weighed possible criminal referrals. Legal teams prepared, allies fell silent, and every public step was shadowed by the question of whether accountability would, at last, reach even the highest offices. Gone were the calculated pivots and press-friendly soundbites. In their place came crisis management, damage control, and the slow erosion of a reputation once built on the notion of unassailable control. The lesson for others in power was clear. Not even decades of experience or service offered immunity when confronted by undeniable evidence. Jasminecrockett's story was very different, but not without complexity. Celebrated as a new champion for transparency, she navigated sudden stardom with a steady hand, careful to root her public persona in facts rather than just spectacle. Overnight, she became a household name, a symbol of fearless oversight and the power of meticulous preparation. Her staff grew, her national platform swelled, but with new influence came new challenges. Pressure to replicate this level of accountability across broader issues, the burden of increased scrutiny, the expectation to lead a movement that stretched far beyond her committee seat. She was thrust into the role of defender for every citizen who had ever felt invisible to power, and she understood that a single victory, no matter how historic, was not the finish line, but a call to action. Yet perhaps the most profound shift was less about individuals and more about the culture of politics itself. The spectacle of the hearing, broadcast live and immortalized in memes, placed a new set of expectations on Congress, the media, and the public. Lawmakers felt the ground shift underfoot. Old practices of evasion had been exposed, and younger generations, armed with social media and a hunger for authenticity, now demanded answers, documentation, and clear lines between public service and self-service. Staffers pored over paper trails with fresh urgency. Committee chairs faced calls to open investigations that had long been shelved or stalled. Even those far removed from the spotlight looked over their shoulder, newly aware that no secret was safe for long. What happens next isn't just a matter of politics, it's a matter of trust. The hearing didn't just reveal the alleged misdeeds of one powerful individual, it revealed the power that ordinary people still hold, when evidence overpowers evasion and voices of accountability refuse to be silenced. New laws advocating for whistleblower protection gained traction in Congress. Citizens, having witnessed the system at work and at risk, clamored for reforms covering lobbying, financial disclosures, and ethical conduct by public officials. Calls to leverage technology, transparency, and independent oversight grew louder, with Crockett often invoked as the example of what's possible when those in office refuse to settle for less than the truth. And yet the story remains unfinished. Political old guard figures and reformers alike know that today's scandal can fade from view just as quickly as it arises, unless vigilance is sustained, unless the machinery of accountability keeps grinding forward. The aftermath is a crossroads. Will Washington heed the lesson, strengthen the guardrails, and rebuild public trust? Or will habits of secrecy slowly creep back in as the headlines fade? In the end, the answer comes down to each of us, as viewers, as voters, as guardians of a system built to serve the many, not the few. The lesson is simple. Truth, once unleashed, cannot easily be forced back into the shadows, and it's up to all of us to keep the lights focused on power, to demand more from those who seek to hold it, and to remember that one moment of transparency can change the course of history. The next chapter is unwritten, but as the world saw in that hearing room, it's never too late to change how the story ends.